Hello and welcome to another episode of Hollywood Wargaming, and it would appear that my opinion has caused some controversy. In a previous video, I did a list covering what units I need to see appear in official Star Wars Legion releases in order for me to consider the game quote-unquote complete before it would be potentially discontinued. And in that video, I failed to make a disclaimer saying that I really prioritize the characters that appear in the films, as to me, those are the core pillars of what is canon in the Star Wars universe. However, over the last decade, it has become very obvious that there is non-theatrical release media that is definitely here to stay in terms of canon, and most of that is what I would call the Filoniverse. Now, I'm not really going to get into diving into who Dave Filoni is, as I'm sure most of you already know, but he is a producer and content creator who is a holdover from the George Lucas-owned version of Lucasfilm, who continued to operate under Disney and has become a beacon of light for a lot of long-term Star Wars fans. And I am going to go on a bit of a mini rant here, one that's not directly related to Star Wars Legion as a tabletop game, but one that I think is very relevant in terms of Legion releases and where I stand as a content creator and a Star Wars fan. Now, I personally grew up watching the original Star Wars movies on VHS cassettes, and I was always super confused as to who that old guy was standing with Yoda and Obi-Wan at the end of Return of the Jedi. However, by the time the animated Clone Wars movie and television series came around, Lucasfilm was definitely focusing on producing content for a different demographic, most notably a younger demographic, and initially it was a far cry from the somewhat gritty Shadows of the Empire and Legends content we saw in the 90s, which is what I grew up with, and I never really got all that into it. However, with the amount of prequel love we see among the younger Star Wars fans, I think it's safe to say that Filoni, under the guidance of George Lucas, accomplished exactly what he set out to do. But I'm sure you guys are going to understand where I'm coming from when I say that I never really got into this newer era of Star Wars, as even the most die-hard Clone Wars fans will tell you that the initial film and first season are a little turbulent at best. And that's not a dig on the Clone Wars, it's something that's pretty prevalent among most long-form television series. And as time went by, Filoni and co. definitely really dug into their characters and the stories they were telling, and the writing, animation, and tone really grew into their own. And since then, I've definitely gone back and watched some of the highlights of the Clone Wars series, and while I still don't think it's really the content for me, I do have a lot of respect for it, and it definitely fleshed out a lot of that prequel era of the Star Wars universe in very interesting ways with very interesting characters. Unfortunately, with the transfer to Disney and Star Wars Rebels, it feels like the crew kinda had to hit the reset button, and I don't have nearly as much interest in that as I do with the Clone Wars. But there is a lot of Rebels and Clone Wars characters who have showed up in Star Wars Legion already, and with me covering units from The Mandalorian, and not the other pieces of media that Filoni was a showrunner on prior to, is definitely a bit unfair, especially considering the amount of crossover with both characters and storylines that have appeared throughout these shows. So, with no further ado, I'm going to turn my blind eye towards the Filoni-inspired units that we need to see in Star Wars Legion before the game comes to an end. And much like the previous video on this topic, I want to iterate that Star Wars Legion, to our knowledge, is not coming to an end. We have a very robust wave coming out for the remainder of 2021, and despite recent shakeups and uncertainties, I think we're going to have at least 12 months more of Star Wars Legion, which will give us a good amount of time to chalk a lot of units off of this list. But first up here, we are going to have two main players in the Filoni series. One who is arguably the tentpole and core character of his entire work, and this is going to be AHSOKA TANO and ASAJJ VENTRESS. Now, ASAJJ was of course Dooku's apprentice before being betrayed and going rogue and becoming a bounty hunter, which is not all that dissimilar from AHSOKA, who of course was Anakin's apprentice, though I think both of them will fit in with the Separatist and Republic factions respectively. AHSOKA herself, due to her involvement in Rebels and The Mandalorian, could actually be ported over and be a dual faction character for both the Republic and the Rebels. Meanwhile, ASAJJ could actually have two profiles, perhaps one being her Force user Sith apprentice, and the other being her time as a quote-unquote incognito bounty hunter, though I don't believe her time as a bounty hunter would really line up with Separatist allegiance, but it would be cool to have two very different ways to field the same character. And she could even have armament upgrades to represent the different types of lightsabers she wields, while AHSOKA would probably have something like Arsenal 2, and two weapon profiles with her standard lightsaber and then also her Tanto lightsaber. And overall, both of these characters are very important to the prequel era of Star Wars, but more importantly for me, I think they would make for some very unique and awesome unit cards, and if you want my take on it, I think they will be inevitably released within a year's time. That goes especially for Ahsoka. But next up, we are going to move along to another fan-favorite character for the Imperials, and this will be Grand Admiral THRAWN. Now, THRAWN is actually a character who has been ported over from the previous existing Star Wars Legends, but Filoni has been pretty true to the character overall as a grand strategist, and even though I'm not actively watching any of these television series, it's pretty awesome to see Filoni sort of filtering over some of the better stuff from the previous canon. And believe me when I say that while I'm not interested in a lot of the Filoni stuff, there is plenty of stuff from Legends that I wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole. THRAWN, however, is a character who'd be right at home in the Imperial faction, and I could see him being a very powerful commander with strong support abilities, and perhaps even some control abilities, sort of like we saw on the new Super Tactical Droid. And with his presence in Rebels, I think there actually is a good chance that we may see him on the tabletop. In my previous video, I talked about characters like Grand Moff Tarkin and Nute Gunray, and how Legion kind of shies away from those commanders who aren't actually on the battlefield usually. But we did see THRAWN get in his own little Veers outfits and show up to lead the troops, and I think that's just enough to push him over the edge and have him show up as a battlefield commander. But moving on from THRAWN, of course we're going to have some clone troopers. How could it be a Filoni video without them? And of course we are going to have the Bad Batch, who just finished off their first season and are getting ready for another one. Now, personally, I'm not a very big fan of the Bad Batch. I think they're trying a little bit too hard to be cool, and I think I'd get a little bit twitchy if we saw them show up before Clone Commandos. But that may be the case considering that their show is one of the few pieces of Star Wars media that is currently running. And hey, at the end of the day, they are a great contender for that Special Forces slot. However, I'm not exactly sure how you would make this unit work in Star Wars Legion. For Clone Commandos, it's pretty obvious that you would go with the Mandalorian Resistance or Inferno Squad route, but there is no standard Bad Batch units, so I'm not really sure how you would incorporate these characters as a heavy weapon upgrade and then have them slot into a unit card that has Equip on it, though they could just be a singular unit that has a lot of diverse keywords and weapon profiles. I'm sure the team at Atomic Mass Games could figure out a way to make it work, and honestly, we could even see Hunter come out as his own commander units, or perhaps even operative. But next up here, we are going to have some more characters from the Rebels era of Star Wars, which in my opinion is going to be very important for the Imperials and Rebels factions, as during the time of the original trilogy, we don't have a whole lot of Force users to tap into. So bringing in some of those remnants from the Old Republic during the early days of the Empire is going to be a great way to get more saber wielders and Force users onto the tabletop for those two initial factions. And for the Imperials, we are of course going to have the Inquisitors. Now, the Grand Inquisitor himself would absolutely be a named character, likely a commander unit, and I could see him perhaps having something like Covert Ops built into his units, and also have a hand of command cards that would be very harsh and based around controlling and undermining your opponent's strategies, with some combat elements mixed in there. But I'm not exactly sure how we would handle the rest of the Inquisitors. There is a whole line of them who are named characters, and if Atomic Mass Game decided to release every single one, it would probably be a bit of an overload for the operative rank in the Imperials. But I guess I could just see them doing the Grand Inquisitor and then also the Second Sister. But of course, all of these Inquisitor units would be Force users and saber wielders, and then also probably have the Jedi Hunter keyword. It's only fitting for them, and it would bring a lot of new play to the Empire, who currently only really have 2 melee units, with Vader and the Dewbox, though I guess you could count Bosk in there too. But lastly, we are going to have 2 more characters from Rebels, who, much like the Inquisitors, are going to be a new avenue of approach for the Rebels, if you're looking to take some saber-wielding Force users. And this, of course, is going to be Kanan and EZRA. And while I'm not super familiar with Rebels, these guys just kind of seem like more generic Jedi heroes that we see in a lot of our Star Wars media, so I'm not really sure what kind of flavor you would add to them. I'm sure EZRA would be an operative character. I'm not really sure if Kanan would be a commander or an operative, but they would obviously both be Force users, and I could see Kanan being a somewhat support-oriented Jedi, kind of like Obi-Wan Kenobi. Meanwhile, EZRA could have snowballing abilities in his command cards akin to Anakin Skywalker to represent him learning the ways of the Force and growing as a Jedi. And considering that we already have Sabine Wren in the game, I think there is a good chance that we will see one, if not both of these operatives in the future, though I don't think it's going to be nearly as soon as some of the other characters that we've covered in this video. But that is going to wrap up all the characters that we need to see from the Filoni-verse before Star Wars Legion comes to an end. Obviously, there's a ton more characters that we would love to see show up in the game, but these are the most urgent of them. And again, if Legion were to come to an end in the near future, it would feel like we skipped a few beats if we missed out on some of these characters. But I hope this video filled in a lot of the gaps that you guys felt were missing from the previous video. Again, all these videos are my personal opinions. In the previous video on this topic were things that I very much needed to see, and I understand that turning a blind eye on characters like AHSOKA and ASAJJ are very much biased. But let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below. What characters would you be incredibly upset if you didn't see appear in Legion before its end? Again, to my knowledge, the game's not going anywhere. This is not a doom and gloom video, it's more just theory crafting. But as always, if you enjoyed the video, go ahead, leave a like, consider subscribing to the channel and turning on notifications, and until next time, take care.